Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chad Berg. I'm an advisor here at InfiniTALKS. I'll just be helping moderate today's webinar. We're excited to have a great guest joining us today to discuss Social Security, which is often one of the most misunderstood components of retirement planning. Just a few housekeeping items. The session is being recorded and will be available on our website once it's been approved by compliance. The presentation is going to be around 45 minutes today, and we'll plan on leaving time at the end to answer any questions. So if you do have questions at the end of the meeting, we'll let you unmute yourself, but please wait to the end to do that. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Her name is Lindsay Reynolds. Lindsay is the Regional Vice President and Business Consultant at Manulife John Hancock Investments. She works closely with financial professionals and clients across Kansas and Missouri, and brings a ton of experience in the asset management and investment industry. She has extensive experience helping advisors and clients navigate important retirement topics, including Social Security. She grew up in Olathe and currently lives in Overland Park. So here in our Kansas City community, we're very fortunate to have her today to help us better understand Social Security. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Lindsay.
All right, great. Thank you, Chad. And Chad, just doing a check here. Can everyone see the slide deck?
Yes, I think we're good.
All right. Started here. So, hi everyone, welcome. I'm thrilled that you're all here. And as Chad mentioned, today we're tackling Social Security, which is one of those topics that somehow manages to be both important and confusing at the same time. And if you've ever tried to read the Social Security website and thought, I need a snack and a nap, you're not alone. So here's the good news. You don't need to memorize every rule. You just need to understand the handful of levers that drive the outcome, because the decision you make affects your income for life. It also affects your spouse, and it can affect your taxes. Also, Social Security is one of the few retirement income sources that includes inflation adjustment, so it can play a really meaningful role in your retirement income floor. So quick housekeeping item before we get into things. This is an educational webinar. I am not giving any tax or legal advice, and I won't be making any individualized recommendations live. By the end, you'll know what to ask and what to avoid, and we will do some Q&A here at the end when you coordinate this with your overall retirement plan with your advisor. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. So today we'll move through 4 parts. First, we'll take a look at the roots of Social Security, just quick history, but it does set up why the program is under pressure. Second, we'll talk about where Social Security stands today, what's real, what's hype, and what's most likely to change. Third, we'll go through make sure that we all understand the program and how to maximize your benefits. This is where we'll spend most of our time, focusing on how benefits are calculated, when to claim, and how spouses and survivors fit into things. And fourth, we'll just run through some quick changes for 2026. Cost of living adjustment, taxable wage cap changes, and some other important updates. So no polls or quizzes today. We'll keep the flow smooth, and we'll save all the questions for Q&A at the end. So let's start at the beginning, because Social Security makes a lot more sense when you're originally designed to do. And spoiler, it was never designed to be your entire retirement plan. It was designed to be a base layer. So Social Security has been around for less than a century. The Great Depression of the 1930s exposed a pretty significant vulnerability in our society, namely that the elderly could have their savings completely wiped out by bank failures and have no source of income at a time when jobs are very scarce. So thus, the Social Security Act was signed into law in 1935. At the signing of the law, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, "We can never insure 100% of the population against 100% of the hazards and vicissitudes of life. But we have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against the loss of a job and against poverty-ridden old age." In other words, Social Security is here to be a safety net, and that's what it's created to do. So moving along, taxes were collected for Social Security beginning in 1937, those nice little FICA taxes that we see on our pay stubs, and regular ongoing monthly benefits started in 1940. This matters because the program was designed in an era where retirement looked very different: shorter retirements, fewer beneficiaries, and a very, very different worker to retiree ratio. That's going to connect directly to the "Where Are We Today" story here in a few slides. So one practical takeaway already: Social Security is best thought of as a foundation, not the whole house. If you build your retirement plan as if Social Security replaces your paycheck, it's usually a pretty rough surprise. So this is one of my favorite Social Security stories because it's very human. So we talked about how benefits started to be paid out in 1940. So on January 31st, 1940, the first monthly retirement check went to Ida Mae Fuller. Ida was a retired legal secretary, and her first monthly check was for $22.54 when she was 65. And I know that doesn't sound like much for us today, but it was actually equivalent to about $500 in present times. So Ida actually lived to be 100 years old, and during her lifetime, she received $22,888 in benefits. Now that, again, that doesn't sound like a lot of money today, but she only paid $24.75 into the system. So that's a pretty solid rate of return. Longevity. When people live longer, Social Security becomes more valuable to the individual because it pays as long as you live. But it also becomes a lot more expensive for the system. And for you personally, it frames the core question of claiming, do you want smaller checks sooner or bigger checks later that protect you if you end up living a long time? So let's fast forward today. So today, almost 69 million people currently receive Social Security benefits. That includes 9 out of 10 people age 65 or older. In 1940, the life expectancy of a 65-year-old was almost 14 years. So Ida Mae definitely blew past that. Today, it's over 23 years, and benefits represent about 30% of the income for folks that are over 65 on average. Also important among beneficiaries and older, a larger share, about 37% of men and 42% of women, receive 50% or more of their income from Social Security. So translation, for many retirees, this isn't nice to have, it's core income. So as we go through, I'll kind of address some common pitfalls, with this first one being treating Social Security like extra spending money and then later realizing that it's the thing holding your budget together. So now that we've kind of talked about, the history of Social Security, we can talk a little bit about where the system stands today. So this is the section where people usually lean in and ask, okay, so should I be worried? So let's separate headlines from reality. So here's kind of the truth in 3 lines. It will almost certainly be fixed. It appears to be in financial trouble over current protections, and even after it's fixed, it's likely not going to grow fast enough to do all the work people want it to do. So the planning mindset I like is Social Security is real, it matters, and it's not going away, but it's also not a complete retirement plan. We plan with it as a foundation. We don't build a plan that collapses if policies adjust over time. So another common pitfall is planning under extremes. Either it'll be exactly the same forever or it'll be gone completely. Most likely that outcome is going to be something in the middle. So this slide shows some of the structural pressure points for the program today. First, retirees live longer today. Again, that's good news for us, but not so great news for Social Security, which was really created for retirees who, on average, really weren't living all that long. Again, Ida Mae Fuller was obviously an exception to that rule. Now, one caveat about life expectancy, there are many different ways to calculate it, and we have not really begun to understand the impact of the pandemic on life expectancy numbers in this country yet. Second, benefits cover more categories than just retired workers. When Social Security was first created, it only provided benefits to retired workers. But very quickly in 1939, spousal benefits and survivor benefits for spouses and children got added in. And then in 1956, disability benefits were added. And then in 1972, cost of living adjustments were added. So this means that, between the time that Social Security was established to today, the system is paying out a lot more than it was originally intended to. So, third and most important, as a result of us all living longer and the decline of the country's birth rate, there are far fewer workers per beneficiary paying into Social Security today than there were in 1950. In 1950, there were 16 workers paying into Social Security for each recipient. Today, there are only 2.7 workers per recipient. That single ratio explains a huge portion of why the system is going to need some adjustment over time. So, practical takeaway here, when you hear political debate about Social Security, the math underneath is mostly about demographics, and you can't wish demographics away. So, we have to plan accordingly. So you've probably heard the stories that because of the imbalance in its finances, Social Security is going to go broke sometime in the not too distant future. So how did we get to this point? Well, starting in 2010, the program started paying out more in benefits than it collected in revenues. So how is that possible? Well, because the program built up a trust fund of surplus revenues over the years, it can now draw on those revenues to meet its obligations. Those trust fund reserves grew until about 2021. However, the Social Security Administration currently estimates that by the year 20 going to be able to meet about 83% of its obligations, or in other words, it will be bankrupt. So, two important notes. One, that does not mean that the benefits go to zero. And two, historically, fixes are usually phased in rather than overnight. So one pitfall to avoid here is by making claiming decisions out of fear from a headline. So, I'm gonna claim early because, I think that Social Security is gonna be insolvent. A better approach is making a decision based on your health, your spouse, your work plans, and your tax situation. So, how do we address this impending insolvency of Social Security? This slide lists some proposals that you've likely heard at some point. One is raise from full retirement age. Another is increase payroll tax rates. Another one is increase payroll tax caps or eliminate it altogether. So, for those of you that haven't noticed, Social Security taxes only come out up to a certain point of your income. Once you make above that cap, you're no longer taxed for Social Security. So one of that proposals is to get rid of that cap altogether. Another is to reduce benefits for higher income earners. So it's too soon to tell how this is going to shape up, but I do think you can already see that solving the Social Security problem, while it can be done, is not going to be the easiest of fixes. However, you don't have to predict which one is going to happen to plan well. The main planning takeaway here for you is simply Social Security is a base layer, but for most households, especially higher earners, it is not going to replace a very large percent of your working income. And again, so that's why we plan Social Security as part of a broader retirement income strategy, looking at your savings, your investment income, and doing your tax planning. So we can assume or hope that Social Security will play a role in the retirements of everybody on this call. But the question is really how big a role. So let's talk numbers. The slide estimates that the average Social Security retirement benefit in 2026 a month, or around $24,852 per year. It also reminds us that lower income earners generally see a higher replacement percentage, and as earnings rise, Social Security replaces a smaller share of your pre-retirement income. So the most common planning mistake here is just it's really emotional. People think I paid a lot in, so I should get a lot out. But the system is progressive by design, so replacement rates are going to vary. So if you're planning retirement spending, start by identifying what Social Security will cover reliably, and then build the rest of the income plan around your savings and other sources. And if you're younger, there's still a way to do that to get an idea of what your benefits could be. If you go to ssa.gov, there is a calculator there that you can use using your own work history. So now we get to the good part, what you can control. And this here is where rules become strategy. So we've already discussed life expectancy, but I want to reiterate that the longer people live, the more money they'll need to live comfortably in retirement. And this especially rings true for couples. Even if one spouse has average longevity, the odds that at least one partner in a couple lives into their late 80s or 90s, as you can see in this chart, is pretty significant. This matters because Social Security is, again, it's a lifetime benefit. So the longer you live, the more valuable it becomes for you. Of course, the more strenuous on the system. And for couples, it's not just thinking about how long am I going to live, it's thinking about how long does at least one of us live. So one common pitfall people plan to break even and just kind of stop there. But the real risk we plan around is outliving money, especially in those later years when healthcare and long-term costs can rise. And most folks are not going to be, physically fit enough to work too much longer into their retirement. So when we think about that, here are some of the big decision drivers just on one slide. Income need, age difference, longevity, marital status, and work status. So let me translate that into plain English. If you need income right away, that may push early if there's a big age difference. We often focus on maximizing the higher earners benefit because that can end up becoming the survivor benefit. If you expect to work, claiming early can trigger withholding rules and reduce the practical value of claiming. And if longevity is in the family, delaying can be a way to increase inflation-adjusted income later in life. So one common pitfall is that folks say, well, we're going to both claim at 62 because that's when it starts. 62 is indeed when you can claim, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the optimal time to claim. So before we dig into the details, I do want to mention that Social Security is subject to what we call cost of living adjustments, or COLA, which although it does, it will increase your benefits over time, most recipients consider it to be pretty minimal. So some years are small, as you can see, and some years are big. And yes, as you can see, there have been some years where COLA was 0. So here's kind of the key strategy point. COLAs compound on your base benefit. A larger starting benefit generally means for every COLA increase produces a larger dollar increase over time. So if you're worried about inflation and retirement, and obviously that is a hot button issue right now, and most people should be, Social Security is one of your few inflation adjusted income sources. That makes the claiming decision more than just math. It also makes it risk management. So one common pitfall for retirees is ignoring inflation and assuming that retirement expenses just stay flat. They rarely do, especially as it pertains to healthcare. So let's go ahead and demystify how is Social Security calculated. So in order to qualify for Social Security, you would need at least 10 years of work or 40 credits to qualify. You earn those credits through income, and you're capped at 4 credits per year. So it doesn't matter if you're making 50,000 or 500,000, you are capped at 4 credits per year. Once you have those credits, your earnings are wage indexed to reflect wage growth. And then Social Security uses your highest 35 years of earnings, averages them, divides them by 12 to get your average indexed monthly earnings. Then a formula converts that into your primary insurance amount, which is the benefit that you get at your full retirement age. So here's two common pitfalls. One is that if you have worked fewer than 35 years, again, note they're going to average your highest 35 years of earning. So if you have not worked for all 35 of those years, zeros get included, which can really lower your benefit. And that's something I think to factor in when you decide when you're going to fully retire. Pitfall 2 is people don't check their earnings record. While errors are pretty uncommon, they do happen and they can reduce benefits. And they're a lot easier to fix sooner rather than later. That's where, again, regardless of if you're nearing retirement or you're in your 30s, you can go to the Social Security website and see your own personal work history to make sure that your work history is being recorded appropriately. So again, go online, go to ssa.gov, create your online account and review that history. And we'll kind of show you how to do that later on in the presentation. So I mentioned that term full retirement age. So what is full retirement age? Full retirement age is the point in your life when you'll receive your full Social Security benefit amount, that primary insurance amount that we just calculated. It depends on your birth year, and it can affect the amount of benefits that you receive. So this slide just shows an important concept. It illustrates that even though you can start taking benefits at 62, those benefits are going to be reduced compared to your full retirement age. And if you delay claiming until age 70, those benefits are actually increased compared to your full retirement age. So here's some simple framework. Again, 62 is the earliest you can claim retirement benefits. Your benefit amount will be reduced if you retire early at 62 before reaching that full retirement age. And as you can see over here, that it's going to depend on your year of birth. But I think for most folks, it's probably that 66 and 10 months or 67. If you do start to receive benefits at 62, you'll receive anywhere between 70 and 75% of the benefit you would have had at full retirement. And now this is important. That reduction is permanent. You don't get to go back up to your primary insurance amount when you get to full retirement age. The benefit that you receive at age 62, that is the benefit that you are going to receive every month for the rest of your life. So if you do decide to claim early, that's where you just have to think really long and hard about the long-term implications. Now that full retirement amount is going to be your standard benefit. Now, if you delay receiving benefits until age 70 and only up until age 70, your benefit amount could increase to anywhere from 124% up to 132%, depending on your year of birth, of the benefit that you would have had at full retirement age. That is a massive amount. So again, there's no right or wrong. This is all situational, and this is why it's important to work with your financial advisors. But again, my big takeaway from this would be if you are taking Social Security claims before your full retirement age, just be aware that it will be reduced and that reduction is indeed permanent. One other thing to note is lots of folks confuse full retirement age with Medicare eligibility at 65. Medicare has its own timeline and Social Security has its own timeline. And, a meaningful number of people do claim at 62. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And it's not always a mistake, but it should be a very conscious choice, not just because I can. So let's look at a real life example of how that works. So this table shows the actual impact of claiming age on the percentage of the full retirement age benefit you receive. So if you were born after 1960, your full retirement age is 67. Assume that same monthly benefit at $2,000 a month is what you get at full retirement age. So if you retire early at 62, you're only going to receive 70% of what you would have received at full retirement age, or $1,400 a month as opposed to $2,000. On the flip side of that, and again, that is permanent. That's what you will receive even once you get to full retirement age. If you retire at 70, you'll receive 124% of what you would have received at full retirement age, or $2,480 a month. That's $1,000 difference almost between 62 and 70. So the big takeaway is the shape of this trade-off. Claiming early means a permanent reduction. Claiming at full retirement age means your full scheduled benefit, and delaying increases the benefit up to age 70. If you delay past 70, there's no benefit. So a practical way to think about this is you're deciding whether you want to insure yourself against longevity, because delaying tends to buy more lifetime income if you live longer, or if you need the income now. So common pitfall there is just thinking I'll take it early and invest it. So I'm sure you've heard folks say I'd be better off just putting this into the stock market. And sometimes that works on paper, but it ignores the fact that Social Security is inflation adjusted and guaranteed. And as we've all learned the last few years, the markets most certainly are not. So we've now looked at taking early retirement at 62 versus full retirement age versus delaying benefits till age 70, in terms of what happens to that monthly benefit. But to really understand the impact, let's look at annual benefits with a 3% COLA. Please note this is just a hypothetical example. Again, in reality, that COLA changes from year to year. So this slide shows a concept that surprises a lot of people. Delaying can increase the total amount received over a lifetime depending on longevity. So this shows an example of someone who would collect $25,920 a year at full retirement age at 67 if born after 1960. By collecting early, that benefit is reduced to just $18,000 annually. By waiting until age 70, that annual benefit jumps to $31,680. Now, over time, these differences do add up. So in this example, by age 87, delaying can produce higher total benefits even though you started later. And there's a second layer here that isn't always shown on charts. Claiming timing can also affect how much you withdraw from your portfolio early in retirement. Some households claim early to avoid drawing from their investments, but if that locks in a smaller benefit forever, it can increase the risk of higher withdrawals later when you really want that stability most. So good practical tip, think of Social Security as a piece of the pie. It's part of your retirement income sequence. The timing decision interacts with your portfolio withdrawals, your 401ks, your IRAs, your taxes. It wasn't until the 1950s that Congress amended the Social Security law to actually allow people to start taking benefits at 62. This was originally only intended for spouses, but later it was extended to everybody. Of course, the catch is that the benefit you receive is less than you would have received if you would have collected at full retirement age, and you're stuck with that lower payment forever. So taking payments I know taking payments early is tempting, and it's true that each of you here has your own break-even age. We just don't know how long we're going to live, so the impulse to start getting payments as soon as we can, again, can be very tempting. However, as we'll see on this next slide, you may end up living longer than you think. So how do you decide when to claim? I think I've mentioned a couple times now break-even points. So break-even can be a useful tool. So what is it? The Social Security break-even age is the point, typically somewhere between the ages of 78 and 81, when the total cumulative lifetime benefits from delaying retirement or those higher monthly payments surpass the total benefits received by claiming lower monthly payments. In other words, some folks worry, I'm going to take my payments earlier because I want to make sure I'm getting as much money as I can. So at what point is the break-even point where actually delaying means you get more in the long run? And again, for most, it's somewhere here in the 78 to 81 range. So in this scenario, if you were to delay taking distributions until age 87 instead of 62, and you lived past age 77 and a half, you'll receive cumulatively more Social Security benefits. If you delay till age 70 instead of age 62 and you live past age 81.9, you will receive more Social Security benefits. And if you delay till age 70 instead of 67 and live past 84.5, you'll receive more Social Security benefits. So put simply, the longer you live past those break-even points, the more benefits you receive. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that you'll really want to consider is your health and the history of longevity in your family. For those that expect to live to or beyond their life expectancy, it may make a lot of sense to delay taking those benefits. With that said, though, I do want to clearly state that break-even is not the whole strategy. Break-even ignores spouse and survivor implications. inflation compounding, taxes, Medicare premium thresholds, and just the general value of reducing late life financial stress. So some folks may be saying, well, if I don't live past break even, I lose. And that's just not how good planning works. Planning is not a bet, it is simply risk management. For couples, especially, maximizing that higher earners benefit often matters more than the break even number. So one major factor in deciding to take benefits earlier or delay will be if you're still working. And I think that's becoming more and more of an issue today. This slide covers what we call the earnings test, which can be another big source of confusion for folks. So before full retirement age, if you earn above a threshold, 24,480 on this slide, Social Security withholds $1 in benefits for every $2 above the limit. So if you are still working before you hit your full retirement age, they are going, and you are simultaneously taking Social Security, they are going to withhold $1 for every two above that particular limit. Now, in the actual year that you reach your full retirement age, you do get a higher threshold that gets bumped up to 65,160. And at that point, Social Security begins withholding $1 for every $3 above the limit. Now, once you hit the month of your full retirement age, there is no earnings limit. So if you hit 67, again, if you're born after 1960, if you hit 67 and you're still working, there's no longer a limit. You can work and be getting your full retirement benefit from Social Security at the same time. So these rules are just kind of designed to encourage, continued work by gradually reducing the penalty as you approach full retirement age. At the end of the day, when Social Security was created, it was created to encourage people to retire. Again, back in the 30s, we had lots of folks unemployed, and a lot of them were elderly. So it was really just a system to encourage some of these more elderly folks to go ahead and get comfortable with retiring. So a couple common pitfalls. One, people think withholding is a tax. And are adjusted. So it's not a tax, it's more like timing, but the cash flow still does matter. And two, is when people claim early while still earning strong income, and then they get frustrated when checks are withheld. The last thing you want to do is, claim at 62, have that benefit permanently reduced, and then find out that that Social Security is going to withhold, possibly 100% of your monthly benefits because of what you make. So again, just a conversation to have with your financial advisor before you pull the trigger. And also, if you do plan to work in retirement and again, claim Social Security simultaneously, it's worth running through those numbers with your advisor before claiming. Now let's move on to spousal benefits. Spousal benefits matter a lot, especially for households where one spouse earns significantly less or stayed home. So in 1939, Congress amended Social Security to include a provision for spouses who may not have had a sufficient earnings history. They didn't get those 40 credits to generate a decent Social Security benefit on their own. So today, a non-working spouse or spouses who didn't get those 40 credits on their own work history can actually take a portion of their spouse's primary insurance amount as a benefit. This slide also highlights an important rule. To qualify for a spousal benefit, the other spouse, the worker whose work history you are filing under, they have to have already filed. So if your husband is working or if your wife is working and you're planning on claiming a spousal benefit, but they have not claimed, you have to wait until they have claimed Social Security to claim the spousal benefit. One common pitfall here is that folks will assume that spousal benefits are automatic. So when their spouse claims, they're enrolled automatically, that is not the case. You have to claim them. Another pitfall is mixing up spousal benefits with survivor benefits. Spousal benefits are while both are living. Survivor benefits, and we'll get to those, are after one spouse passes. Different rules, different payouts, very different planning implications. So at full retirement age, spousal benefits can be up to 50% of the worker's primary insurance amount. So, but if claimed early at 62, your benefit will be permanently reduced. And it will be based on your full retirement age, and it'll be anywhere between 32.5% and 35% of your spouse's primary insurance amount. So that's a really important nuance and very common misconception. For spousal benefits, oh, and just another thing to note, for spousal benefits, you will get dinged if you claim before full retirement age. And again, the reduction is permanent. However, unlike full benefits, for spousal benefits, there's no advantage to claiming later than your full retirement age or delaying past 67, for example, because you will never receive more than 50% of your spouse's primary insurance amount. So if someone says, I'll wait until 70 for a bigger spousal benefit, that's usually not how that works. And spousal benefits are often about timing for maximum percentage, generally full retirement age, while again, the original worker benefits can keep growing until age 70. So let's look at an example. I always love putting numbers to these concepts. This table puts dollars to the concept using a $2,000 full retirement amount benefit to the worker. So again, the worker, not the spouse. So if your full retirement age is 67, and your full spousal benefit is $1,000 a month, 50% of your spouse's benefit of $2,000 a month, and you claim early at 62, you would receive 32.5% of your spouse's primary insurance amount, or $650 a month. So by claiming at 62 instead of 67, your benefit has gone down from $1,000 to $650. And again, that is a permanent reduction. Again, as you can see here, there's no benefit in waiting until 70 to claim spousal benefits, until your spouse is also waiting. Again, they have to be claiming also. So takeaway here really is just early claiming is going to reduce your spouse's payment for life. So even if the household can afford to wait, many people claim early simply because they can, and they don't realize that the reduction is permanent. And again, this is very separate from the survivor benefit, which we'll cover here shortly. Social Security benefits for working spouses. The first thing you need to understand is that working spouses must take their own Social Security benefits. But in addition, they may be eligible for what is called a spousal boost, which is also called an excess spousal benefit or real spousal benefit. The math on this slide, you basically just take half of the higher earners benefit, you subtract the lower earners benefit, and the remainder, if any, is the spousal boost that's payable at full retirement age. Again, if it's claimed before full retirement age, it gets reduced. So one common pitfall for folks, if you have two working spouses, is they assume they can simply just choose whichever benefit is larger. In many cases, you receive your own benefit first, and then you can top it off if you're eligible. Just note the boost can certainly help, but for a lot of folks, it's often a lot smaller than you imagine. The survivor benefit is frequently the bigger lever. So let's take a look at how this works. You've got two examples here. You've got John and Mary. John's benefit is $2,000, half is $1,000. Mary's benefit is $750. So when you take that $1,000 minus $750, you get a boost of $250. Sue and Jeff both have benefits where half the higher earner equals the lower earner's benefit, so there's no boost. So this illustrates why some couples hear about the spousal benefit and they think it's a guaranteed add-on, but that's not always the case. If one spouse earns close to half of the higher earner, the boost may be minimal, but if one spouse earned much less, that boost really may matter. All right, let's get on to those survivor benefits. Survivor benefits are incredibly important and very often underplanned. So this slide lists who can collect survivor benefits. It can be a widow or widower, age 60 or older, age 50 if disabled, or at any age if they're caring for a child under 16 or a disabled child who's entitled to benefits on the deceased record. Children can also receive benefits if they meet certain criteria. They need to be unmarried, under the age of 18, or between 18 and 19 in school, or disabled with a disability that started before age 22. And in some cases, dependent parents can qualify if they can prove that they were dependent on the deceased for at least half of their support. So, oh goodness, my apologies. The real life planning point here is the first death in a couple often reduces household income. So income drops a lot, but in reality, expenses don't always drop by a commensurate amount. So maximizing that higher earner's benefit is often a form of survivor protection. One pitfall is that people plan retirement as if both spouses' checks are going to continue forever. They don't. And typically the advisor will keep the higher of the two benefits. So survivor benefits also have their own timeline, and it's important to know when to take them, including what ages are best for maximizing those benefits. At death, the surviving spouse will receive the greater of their own benefit or the deceased spouse's benefit. And taking benefits early, even though you're eligible at age 60 if not disabled, will result in reduced benefits for life. So as you can see here in this case with the full retirement age of 66, if benefits are taken at age 60, then you would receive 71.5% of full retirement age benefits. At age 62, that goes up to 80.3. At age 65, 93.4. Age 67, 100%. So as with spousal benefits, there's no advantage to delaying benefits past full retirement age. That benefit amount is not going to increase past full retirement age. And just a key offside strategy concept, in some cases, a surviving spouse can claim one benefit first, like a survivor benefit, and then later switch to their own retirement benefit if their own benefit will be larger at 70, or vice versa. So the correct sequence just depends on the numbers. Lots of folks just claim the first benefit that's available without considering whether a switch later could actually increase their income later in life. Now let's address what happens in the event of a divorce. Divorce benefits are one of the most overlooked areas of Social Security. Ex-spouse's record. So this slide just kind of summarizes some of the key rules. The marriage had to have lasted 10 years or longer. That spouse has to remain unmarried. More and more, you will see folks later in life that live in sin, so to speak, to make sure they can maximize those benefits. The ex-spouse is receiving a retirement or disability benefit, or the couple has been legally divorced for at least 2 years. So if you've been divorced for at least 2 years, you can claim even though your ex-spouse is not. If you have not been divorced for at least 2 years, you do need to wait until your ex-spouse is receiving a retirement or disability benefit. That's one that people get tripped up on. You do need to be age 62 to receive spousal benefits, or age 60 or 50 if disabled to receive a survivor benefit. If not receiving a retirement or disability benefit, the ex-spouse must be at least 62 and have worked 40 quarters and under in order for the person to receive a spousal benefit. So if your ex-spouse is 60, you can't file. If the ex-spouse remarried and the other person hasn't, the other person remains entitled to the spousal and survivor benefits of the ex-spouse. So two important clarifications, because these are very common misunderstandings. Claiming a divorced spouse benefit does not reduce your ex-spouse's benefit, just like claiming a spousal benefit just does not reduce your spouse's benefit. And eligibility depends on whether you're seeking spousal benefits or survivor benefits and whether you've remarried. So one common pitfall is simply just leaving money on the table simply because you didn't know you qualified. So in the event of a divorce, assuming you meet the criteria that we just discussed, you can receive benefits based on your ex-spouse's record. However, you're also entitled to benefits on your own record, but you don't get to do both. You don't get to take both. You will receive the higher of the two benefits. So you can see from this chart that the spousal benefit in the case of divorce works like a regular spousal benefit. It's based on the primary insurance amount of the ex-spouse. If you take it early, you get that reduction. If you take it at full retirement age, you get 50% of the full benefit. Again, no benefit to delaying past full retirement age. One tip, divorce-related benefits should be coordinated with your own retirement benefit strategy. Again, in some cases, you may have choices about which benefit to start first, and whether maybe switching later makes sense. So now let's talk about the do-over, because some people do this. This actually gets asked about a lot. In other words, what happens if you have filed for benefits and realize that you made a mistake and should have waited? Is there any recourse? And the short answer is yes. As long as it is within 1 year of starting benefits, you can file to withdraw from receiving Social Security benefits. So how do you do that? So as you can see on this slide, you can file what's called Form SSA 521 within 1 year. You do have to repay all of the benefits that you received, and then you can reapply later. So it's kind of like a trial run. Just two important cautions. First, repayment can be pretty significant, especially, if you're in month 11. And second, it's not something that you want to rely on as a strategy. So a lot of folks will say, oh, I'll just undo it when I change my mind. In most cases, you can't. And even when you can, it can be pretty financially painful. Also, something to note is this is only something that you can do one time. And now to the fun part, we get to talk about everybody's favorite subject, taxes. Because Social Security planning is not just when do I claim, it's also what happens after I claim. So regardless of when you file, your combined income can have an adverse effect on your Social Security benefits. So this slide defines what's called combined or provisional income. So it's your adjusted gross income plus non-taxable interest plus half of your Social Security benefits. So this is where a lot of retirees get a little nasty surprise, because Social Security can be tax-free for some people, partially taxable for others, and more taxable as your income rises. So lots of folks think, well, I have a friend who doesn't pay taxes on Social Security, so I won't either. The rules depend entirely on your own personal income sources. So how does it work? And what are the federal income thresholds for Social Security benefits? So for single filers with under 25,000 in combined income, the Social Security benefits are not taxed. 25,000 to 34,000, up to 50% of those benefits can be taxed. And above 34,000 in income, up to 85% of your benefits are taxable. And you can see the joint rates here. So big misunderstanding here is that I'm getting taxed at 85%. That is not a tax rate. For those of you that are a little alarmed right now, it means up to 85% of your Social Security benefit can be included in taxable income and subsequently taxed at your marginal rate. Also, just another tip, taxes can change pretty meaningfully, especially when those RMDs start to kick in or when a spouse dies and a filing status changes. So we want to make sure that we're coordinating those Social Security decisions with much broader tax planning. All right, and I'd also like to address one more common misconception that's a little more recent. So some of you may be thinking, well, I heard that, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act eliminated Social Security taxes. The answer is not exactly. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA, enacted last year, did introduce a pretty significant tax benefit for seniors by increasing the additional deduction for individuals age 65 and older, up to $6,000 per individual, or $12,000 for married couples if you both qualify. So unlike a lot of deductions, this deduction can be claimed on top of your standard deduction, or even if you itemize. So it makes it very broadly accessible. But what it does not do, it does not change the formula for taxing Social Security. It may lower your taxable income, which could reduce or eliminate taxes on Social Security, but it's not going to wipe them out completely. So it's helpful, but does not automatically make your Social Security benefits tax-free. Also, just as a reminder, this tax break did become active in 25, but it does expire in 2028 unless extended by future legislation. But wait, there's more. That is how taxation works at the federal level. But what happens at the state level? Well, as you can see, the policy for state taxes vary pretty widely. This slide lists the 9 states that tax some or all Social Security benefits. There's 9 that don't tax at all. And there's many that exclude Social Security benefits from taxation entirely. As you can see, for those of us fortunate to live in Kansas and Missouri, we fall in that lucky third bucket. So just a tip, if you're considering relocating in retirement, don't evaluate a state based on just one line item. So I wouldn't look at this and say, well, I'm moving to New York. You want to look at the full picture: property taxes, sales taxes, healthcare access, and just overall cost of living. One common pitfall is moving for those tax reasons and then discovering that those other costs more than offset the savings, which would probably be the case in New York. I know we're running up on time. This is what a Social Security statement looks like here. Again, I would just recommend that, even if you're young and you're not close to claiming Social Security, go to ssa.gov, take a look at your work history, make sure it's accurate, and you can actually, again, even kind of model out what your future benefits could look like based on income. Again. Creating an account does take a minute. So, set this up when you're not rushed. As you can imagine, there's a lot of security measures that you'll need to go through. And just one offside caution, there are a lot of Social Security scams out there. Make sure you're using the official site. And on that same note, look at it often. It can help you monitor your record and reduce the risk of someone else trying to access your benefits fraudulently. So with the last few minutes here, let's just run through some of the changes for 2026. We'll just cover the big items: the COLA increases, higher potential benefits for new retirees, higher earnings subject to Social Security taxes, benefit changes for those that are still working, and the Social Security Fairness Act updates. So I'll walk through each of these quickly, focus on what it means in plain language, what to do, what to watch, and what not to assume. So starting with the cost of living adjustment, for 2026, Social Security recipients are given a 2.8 cost of living adjustment. So what does that mean? That means that the average retired worker with a pre-COLA monthly benefit of $2,015 will receive an increase of about $56 per month. As a point of reference, earlier we saw that slide which indicated that, from 2012 to 2026, those COLAs have been as low as 0%. They've gone as high as 8.7%. Just keep in mind that, those do impact your monthly benefits, and they do compound and they add up over time. Of course, they're not guaranteed, and they are going to vary from year to year. And they're not always going to match your personal inflation. Healthcare costs, insurance, housing, they can behave very differently than what the general CPI is showing. And again, I think we've all learned that in the past couple of years. So a smart habit is just, when COLA hits, don't just absorb it into spending automatically. Use it as a moment to recheck the budget, especially if you're early in retirement and you're still kind of calibrating what your spending pattern is going to be. In 2026, for a retiree claiming benefits at full retirement age, the maximum retirement benefit he or she receives increases to $4,152 per month, up from $4,018 in 2025. Of course, we've discussed, if you delay claiming until age 70, that would increase your monthly benefit even more. This mostly affects higher earners, but the broader lesson, kind of does apply to everyone. Again, delaying that full retirement age can lead to higher benefits due to those delayed credits. So, again, when you're deciding whether to delay, don't just ask how much do I get, ask what income level do I need to be guaranteed for my later years. Also, what does that mean for my spouse if I'm the higher earner? Now, more back to the fun stuff, taxes. So the maximum earnings subject to Social Security tax is increasing this year to $1,084,500 from $1,076,100. And again, that's just the amount of earnings that are taxed for Social Security. Once you make $184,500, you're no longer subject to that tax. The good news, though, is that tax rate remains the same, which is about 6.2% on earnings up to that applicable tax maximum. In addition, you do have to pay a Medicare tax, which is assessed on all earned income at a rate of 1.45. And as a reminder, if you are self-employed, you have to pay both the employer and the employee tax. So for Social Security, your maximum payroll tax is plus Medicare is 15.3%. So if you're still working and earning at higher levels, this can slightly shift your tax picture, and it may matter for budgeting. And again, just remember that Medicare taxes apply to all earnings. Social Security taxes only apply up to that cap. All right, benefits for those that are still working. So beginning in 2026, those who are still working and receiving a benefit prior to their full retirement age can have earned income up to $24,480 and still get their full monthly benefit. Above that, that NAFSI withholding applies. They're going to withhold $1 for every $2 above that limit. But again, just as a reminder, that's not a tax. You will get that back later on once you qualify for full benefits. One common pitfall is claiming early because I'm retiring and then realizing that you're still working part-time or consulting enough to trigger that withholding. I mean, that 24,000, we can probably get to that pretty fast. And also just keep in mind that earned income can also have an impact on what you pay for Medicare. So timing your retirement correctly can put some real money in your pocket. All right, and then lastly, last change for 2026 is with regards to the Social Security Fairness Act. So in order to discuss that, I think it's important first to kind of walk through what's meant to change. Some of us probably have no idea what the windfall elimination provision or the government pension offset even was to begin with. So the government pension offset and windfall elimination provision were laws that were instituted back in the early 80s, just to remedy what a lot of people saw as an unfair advantage that public workers had with their pensions. So they cut back, or in the case of the GPO, completely eliminated Social Security retirement benefits that had otherwise actually been fairly earned by government workers. So, who was penalized by those? Teachers in 15 states, police, firefighters, postal workers, the public employee retirement system, state teachers retirement system, even a foreign pension could reduce Social Security benefits. Now, the windfall elimination provision was a penalty imposed on one's own Social Security retirement benefit when you began to collect a pension from a public agency that did not collect FICA taxes. So that applied if you had 40 Social Security credits from another job and a pension from a non-Social Security system. Without getting too much further into that, those have been eliminated. So we have covered a great deal in this presentation, but we've also left a lot unexplored. Your financial advisor has the experience and the analytical tools to help you plan for Social Security and make the most of those retirement assets. So here's just a few other things to discuss with your advisor the next time that you sit down with them and consider before you file. Will your benefits be coordinated with those of a spouse? Are you planning on working in retirement? Have you planned for how your minimum mandatory distributions from your retirement plans could affect your income mix and subsequently your Social Security benefit? And do you have a retirement income tax strategy in place? The key message and the thing I would love for you to take away is that planning is connected to everything. It affects taxes. It affects how much you need from your portfolio of investments. It affects couples with spousal and survivor income. So the main takeaway here is to treat claiming as part of the retirement income plan and not a completely separate box to check. So that brings us to Q&A. As a reminder, I can answer questions about general rules and planning concepts. For anything personalized, it's best that that be handled in a one-on-one conversation where you and your advisor can look at those kind of specific benefit amounts, income sources, and tax pictures. So I know we're bumping right up against time here. So I'm assuming we have time for questions. We can go ahead and jump right in.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and then just ask your question. And if you don't want to ask your question here, of course, feel free to reach out to your InfiniTALKS advisor, or also you can email us at info@infinitalkskc.com. Don't know if we'll have any questions, Lindsay. So
All right.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and everybody, thank you for joining, spending time out of your day with us. Have a great rest of your day.